Only Boost Mobile.
Boost Mobile?
We'll give you a free year of service.
Free year?
When you buy a new 5G phone.
New 5G phone?
Enough.
But I'm your hype man. When you purchase an eligible device, you get $25 off every month for 12 months with credits totaling 1 year of free service. Taxes extra for the device and service plan. Online only.
Why does every recipe I try need 18 ingredients, including a jar of something paste I'll never use again, but will sit in my fridge for 9 months? I just want dinner in the oven, fast. That's why I love Blue Apron's new one-pan assemble and bake meals. They send you fresh ingredients that are already chopped. All you do is put it all together and bake. That's it. No chopping, no weird leftovers, just delicious, easy-to-make meals. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. I am delighted today to be joined by Dr. Victoria Bateman of Gresham College. And here we're talking about her new book, Economica, A Global History of Women, Wealth and Power. A hugely ambitious exploration and kind of reimagining of the role that women have had in the global economy since really since the beginnings of kind of our recorded understandings of history, right to the present day. And the book is really about kind of refiguring a huge facet of economic history, and therefore kind of our understandings about the origins of wealth itself, I suppose. But anyway, I haven't written it, and Victoria has. So to begin with, firstly, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Nick.
Super. Okay, so as I said, the book itself seems very, very kind of ambitious in scope, and perhaps we can begin by looking at the kind of the origins of the ideas for the book and the research and really the journey and where it took you.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to write a global economic history. So one that weaves together all of the different threads of history, taking us on a journey from the Stone Age all the way through to the present day, through the most glittering civilizations and through all of the major economic revolutions, but to do so with a difference. And that difference is that I particularly wanted to center the lives of women, because when you look at so much of economic history, you find that it tends to be written by men, for men, about men. It tends to focus on the lives of men as the movers and shakers of the world economy, without really saying much about women and how women have contributed to the development of our economies and the global economy. So that's the difference.
I suppose wherever you look in our times, in sort of the 21st century and 20th century, for those who are getting a bit, the ideas around labor are almost exclusively kind of masculine coded.
Yeah,
You look
yeah,
at the idea of kind of blue collar labor in the Western world, or kind of Soviet, Stakhanovite kind of Soviet labor,
yeah,
and or white collar, the white collar work of the 1950s and 60s, the kind of the Donald Draper world of Mad Men. And it is becomes almost impossible for some generations to imagine what what feminine labor or women's work actually is.
yeah. Yeah, I mean that's so true. And actually what we tend to think that women only entered the economy as a result of the wars, World
Yeah.
War One and World War Two, that basically women began to take on men's jobs. So as you say, this idea that so much of what we consider work and labor is inherently coded as male. And then we have this kind of story that women began to take on men's work, and then it's been one long upward march ever since through the 20th and 21st century. And really, what the book does is to say that that is really a myth. That
Mhm.
from the very beginning of history, women have always been working and they've always been working hard. That the idea that women have spent most of history as housewives or homemakers is one of the biggest myths of history. And one, a myth that deserves to be smashed.
Well, our modern concept of the housewife or the
Yeah,
homemaker is really a kind of like a construct of post-war improvements
yeah,
in living standards.
yeah,
There's an amazing book by Elizabeth Cohen, Consumers
yeah,
Republic, which
yeah,
talks about how essentially the modern American advertising industry had to make the concept of this kind of domestic engineer, um,
yes,
the kind of the controller of the domestic realm. But of
yeah,
course, there's all sorts of kinds of things that are work that we don't classify
yes,
as work, that
yeah,
that are incredibly challenging and demanding. Nobody is paid there's certain welfare
yeah,
benefits, but nobody is paid a salary for bringing up children, for example.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's right. I mean, let me first of all say that so many of the jobs that we tend to automatically consider to be masculine, whether that is brewing or plumbing, or construction work or legal work, all of those things actually have been done by women as well as men throughout history. So one of the things the book talks about, for example, is in ancient Egypt, women were helping to build pyramids alongside men. In
Hmm.
ancient Rome, women were plumbing alongside men. In medieval London, women were brewing beer. 40% of brewers in London's medieval brewers guild in the early 15th century were women. So, so many of these male dominated parts of the economy, actually, women have often featured in those parts of the economy. But at the same time, when we look at parts of the economy that tend to be labeled female, they tend to be, jobs that either don't don't receive, proper recompense, or, so things like paid care work.
Yeah.
That is one of, I mean, care work is one of the poorest paid parts of the economy, or go without any reward, financial reward at all. So unpaid care. And actually, when you add up all of the people in the world that are providing unpaid care today, it's something like 2 billion people providing the equivalent of full-time labor, unpaid. So 2 billion people, that's a big chunk of the global population.
Yeah.
And three-quarters of that unpaid labor is provided by women.
Hmm.
And, feminist economists have worked out different estimates of if you were to put a value on that labor, if people were to be paid for that labor, how much would that add up to in terms of the size of our economy? And it's between about 20 and 60% of GDP,
Yeah.
of the size of the economy. And so the fact that we don't value that labour, that we leave that out of our calculations, that we don't recognise it, it is literally the equivalent of leaving the US, China, and the EU out of global GDP calculations. So that all of that unpaid labour is really sizable. And if we were to value it and include it, then it would make a big difference.
So it's fair to argue that kind of the modern capitalist system that we have is in some ways built on labor that is not rewarded in any way.
So I would say all economies from the beginning of time, whether they are rich or poor, whether they are slave-based or what we might call free, all economies have depended on women's labours, on women's hard work, both, reproductively and what they can do with their hands as well as their wombs. But what makes the difference between an economy that flourishes long term and one that ends up on the scrap heap of history is whether women themselves get to choose what they do in terms of their labours. Whether they have a choice in terms of whether they are working in the home, whether they are spending time on unpaid care, or whether they're able to go out into the more lucrative, better paid parts of the economy, whether they're able to acquire the skills needed, or whether they're locked out of, for example, educational institutions, and so really are just left with the crumbs. So whether women have a choice in terms of the work that they're doing and whether they have the ability to, keep the rewards rather than other people, exploit them and take those rewards away. That's what varies, across history and across society. So it's not whether women are working. Women have always worked, as my grandmother said to me as a little girl, Victoria, working class women have always worked. It's actually whether we have a choice about the type of work that we're doing. That's the difference.
And there are moments, there have been moments in the 19th and 20th centuries, well, mainly 20th, where there have been kind of, for some women in some societies at some times, breakout moments, perhaps as a result of kind of, you mentioned war work earlier on and the kind of sort of moments of national crisis. But are there things that generally are those moments kind of rarities in the long history of kind of women's the long story of women's economic history?
So I'd say that what we see as progress in the 20th century is in many ways just retrieving ground that was lost in previous centuries. So like in the Victorian era. So in the Victorian era, where you see the idealization of the housewife and women being pushed out of parts of the economy where they had always worked. So in the 19th century, women really end up just doing two types of paid work, and that is working in cotton factories, working in making cloth, and domestic service. And pretty much every other part of the paid economy was monopolized by men, and whether that was, lucrative professions like law and medicine, or whether it was more working class jobs, so you have both guilds, that are looking after the kind of more professional parts of the economy, and then you have trade unions, for example, in printing and hat making and spinning, that are pushing women out of the labour market in order that men can capture the jobs. So in the 20th century, in many ways, it was about retrieving ground that had been lost, including in the 19th century. But what I would say in general is that
Only Boost Mobile.
Boost Mobile.
We'll give you a free year of service.
Free year?
When you buy a new 5G phone.
New 5G phone?
Enough.
But I'm your hype man. When you purchase an eligible device, you get $25 off every month for 12 months with credits totaling 1 year of free service. Taxes extra for the device and service plan. Online only.
Stop settling for weak sound. It's time to level up your game and bring the boom. Hit the town with the ultra-durable LG X Boom portable speaker and enjoy vibrant sound wherever you go. Elevate your listening experience to new heights because, let's be real, your music deserves it. The future of sound is now with LG X Boom. And for a limited time, save 25% at LG.com with code FALL25. Bring the boom. X Boom.
Riley Herbst from 2311 Racing checking in. Got a break in between team meetings? Sounds like the perfect time for some fast-paced fun at Chumba Casino. No waiting, just instant action to keep you going. So next time you need a pick-me-up, fire it up and take a spin. Play now at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba!
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See T&Cs. 21 plus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
What's happening in terms of population growth and population shortages seems to really matter when you look across the long span of history. So wherever we've had periods of history where there are shortages of people, shortages of labour, then that has tended to create opportunities for women. So if there are shortages of, for example, men to do everyday work, and so this happened, for example, after the Black Death, which killed between a half and a third of the population. It also happened after the Bronze Age collapse, when again, big collapse in population, and so fewer men available to do everyday jobs. Then, and similarly, actually, I mean, after World War II, there were population shortages. I mean, of course, it's one of the reasons why immigration becomes, more welcome after World War II, that there are real labour shortages. And there's actually a shortage of people in part because of the Great Depression. And the Great Depression before the war had meant lower fertility rates. People couldn't afford to have children. And that meant you had a smaller working labour force after World War II. So whenever you see shortages of people, then what you find is employers turning to untapped resources, including women. And you tend to find also less male resistance, because if you're in a period of labour shortage, wages tend to be growing a bit more handsomely. And so men as a collective tend to see women as less of a threat. You compare that with instead periods where you have the opposite of labour shortage, where you're flush with labour, where you have, high population growth rates and, for example, people fighting over job opportunities, then what tends to happen is that women are seen as competition for jobs. And so where men are able to collect together, whether in the form of guilds or societies or trade unions, then they tend to push for women to be locked out of the workforce, because that instantly halves the competition you face in terms of getting a job, and means that you can not only get a job, but you can get paid more handsomely because you're not having to compete with, the other half of the population. So I think population trends do, when you look across the long span of history, do factor into periods when women have been more welcome in the informal paid work, and when they've been less welcome and perhaps pushed out.
Well, there are numerous examples particularly in post-war history in America and Britain, where feminist ideas and unionism they collide, and you have male union members saying, well, the only reason you want to employ all these female workers is to drive wages down. And if you're looking at it from the boss's perspective, that's exactly the motivation. But then there are moments of kind of second wave feminism where there have been intense debates within the trade union movement saying, well, hold on a moment, is this consistent with ideas of kind of solidarity and equality.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and I think some of those debates never quite get resolved, but
No.
they the long kind of actual histories and women's labor history
Yeah.
is very much kind of interconnected with industrial action and
Yeah.
women using their labor power.
Yes.
The Match Girls strike, the Bryanton May
Oh,
Match Girls strike
absolutely.
being the classic.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And when we look at Soviet history as well, I mean, the fact that in 1917, you know, the first of the two revolutions in 1917, so the February Revolution,
Yeah,
occurred on International Women's Day,
yeah,
and it was begun by women cloth factory workers,
yeah.
in the Petrograd factories, going out, demanding better reward, tired of poor working conditions, tired of, the high price of bread and food in the shops, and demanding better. And, those women that led that, encouraged more and more people out onto the street, to the point that I think by the second day there were 150,000 people, so men coming on side, showing solidarity with the women. But of course, when we talk about the Soviet Revolution, it's all about, Lenin and then Stalin and so on. It's the big named men, but actually behind the scenes, not only were women leading that, initial revolution in 1917, but there are so many fabulous female revolutionary figures that were really on the inside of the revolution, confronting Lenin and really, for example, demanding, power to the people. When Lenin was trying to push the Soviet state in perhaps a more, top-down direction, you have
Well,
women saying, hang on a moment, this is supposed to be power to the people. This is about people in the factories and in the
yeah.
fields having a say, having their voices heard. So yeah.
One of whom, of course, shot him.
Well, I mean, there are a number of, yes, violent and not so violent female revolutionaries that feature in my 20th century chapter in Economica. I mean, Vera Zasulich, who in 1878, yes, um, uh, attempted to assassinate the Governor General of St. Petersburg, and was perhaps, the first terrorist in a way
Yeah.
of the Tsarist regime. And then Alexandra Kollontai, one of my favorite Soviet revolutionaries, perhaps a more peaceful, more orderly revolutionary who'd spent decades living, amongst ordinary Russian cloth makers, living alongside them, with the experience of the difficult conditions that they faced, was imprisoned for her revolutionary speeches. And then she was made People's Commissar by Lenin until she started to, confront him and disagree with him. And then at that point, she was, sidelined and sent off overseas in an ambassadorial role. But yeah, fascinating, as you say, this battle, in a sense, between solidarity and the opposite within the workers' movement.
Yeah. And I noticed, and I sometimes like to go a bit topical. There was an article this week, well, today, in fact, in the Guardian. I was going to kind of call it up, that it says that, and I quote, the role of women in history goes far beyond Elizabeth I and Anne Boleyn, according to a campaign that seeks to add more female lives and achievement to the curriculum taught in England's schools. Research by the group End Sexism in Schools found that women were largely absent from the history taught in Key Stage 3, the first 3 years of secondary education in England. Monarchs were among only a handful of women mentioned by name, along with suffragettes Emmeline Pankhurst and Emily Davidson, and I could go on. But I guess part of what you're doing, I mean, speaking as a former history teacher, often the way in which ideas percolate down is they obviously start in academia. Normally, because history teachers like myself don't have a chance to read lots of journal articles, they will become popular history, and popular history then informs pedagogy. And so hopefully there is your book will be the kind of a contribution towards this really dire situation that hasn't, I mean, in the sort of like the 15 years or so I was teaching history, hasn't changed at all particularly. There are some notable exceptions, but it's not great.
Yeah. I was watching the news just a few months ago, and I saw this clip, and it was
Only Boost Mobile.
Boost Mobile
We'll give you a free year of service.
free year.
When you buy a new 5G phone.
New 5G phone?
Enough.
But I'm your hype man. When you purchase an eligible device, you get $25 off every month for 12 months with credits totaling 1 year of free service. Taxes extra for the device and service plan. Online only.
The NFL is back, and FanDuel's got everything you need to play your game, from same-game parlays to live betting. Right now, new customers bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. 21 plus and present in select states. 18 plus in Kentucky and Wyoming. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
right-leaning US commentator who claimed that there had never been a successful businesswoman in history and that modern-day prosperity was built pretty much entirely on the historic efforts of men.
I mean, Taylor Swift, I think, there you go.
well, I mean, I think the thing is, it's not, it's sad that he made those claims, but what's even sadder is the fact that no one in the studio could challenge him, because no one could actually name from history a successful female businesswoman or, merchant or banker or investor or, notable woman. No one could name one. And therefore, how could you challenge these claims that modern day prosperity has been built on the efforts of men? Until we can all name the female equivalents of JP Morgan or Henry Ford or whoever else, then we'll continue with this myth that it's men that have created modern day wealth and that women have been either the victims or the passive beneficiaries, rather than the active movers and shakers, for better or worse, for good and for bad.
But also, I mean, speaking as someone whose economics are largely informed by Marxism, the creation of wealth comes from labor,
Yes.
Inspirational entrepreneurs, all very nice and well. Yeah. But the wealth comes from people working in fields and down coal mines.
So, it is individual people being able to take charge of their lives, decide for themselves how they use their talents, rather than being dictated to, rather than having the value of what they create, exploited, taken from them. So it is about individual people having that ability to make the most of their lives. And when you aggregate that to the economy as a whole, then that's what creates a flourishing economy. And so, whether it is people being dictated to in the sense of, ancient Mesopotamia in terms of how and where they work, or in a more modern day context, and sometimes, the Soviet economy was just as bad as some other economies in terms of, then it's about individual people being able to make their own decisions. I think that is really key.
Yeah.
And being able to have the opportunities to do that. So being able to access education, for example, and of course for a long time that wasn't possible for most people. Being able to access healthcare systems that again for a long time wasn't possible for most people, because we can only make the most of our talents, make the most of our lives if we have the skills and the if we're healthy enough to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And and free from things like economic insecurity and debt.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 No, that is right. So women, for example, in many societies haven't had the right to their own incomes or their own wealth. And even today, there are large parts of the world where women are not able to set up their own independent bank account. And so
No.
where their ability to get loans depends on, their husbands going as guarantor for them. Yeah.
And it was, I was born in 1974, and I think that was the year that women were able to have credit cards of their own in Great Britain.
Yes, yes. And also it was around that time that married women could, for the first time, work at the Foreign Office. Because for a long time, there'd been these marriage bars that meant that married women were not able to work in the civil service. I mean, those lasted until just after World War II, but the Foreign Office kept them up to the early 1970s.
Okay.
And so, even if you are a working woman, your options are or were limited. And so in terms of, your ability to save and build your own, financial independence, you were kind of left with the crumbs, really.
Well, we must finish it in a moment, but I think this is a really, really important book. And I say that about many of the books that we talk about here, but particularly in the context of this kind of, we're in this moment of this kind of recrudescence of misogyny, where you have an American president who and his worldwide admirers who essentially embody it, that gets away with crimes against women blatantly, and will, and we are in a huge moment of pushback against rights of minority peoples and women's rights. So a book that helps us to remember and helps us to think critically about the world of work and about gender and about who does the work and who reaps the rewards is really, really important. And I hope, if you are listening to this and you like the sound of the book, please do get it. And remember, if you can buy it from an independent bookshop, please do that. And if not, buy it directly from the publisher, because that means that the money will go to where it's really, really needed.
Thank you, Nick.
You're very welcome. And it's such a huge conversation that it would be lovely to continue with you sometime, Victoria.
Thank you.
Do come back, and it would be great to chat again.
Thank you. We can break it down into its constituent pieces.
Yes, said like a true historian. Thank you so much, and all the very best with the book. Take good care.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Nick.
Only Boost Mobile.
Boost Mobile.
We'll give you a free year of service.
Free year?
When you buy a new 5G phone.
New 5G phone?
Enough.
But I'm your hype man. When you purchase an eligible device, you get $25 off every month for 12 months with credits totaling 1 year of free service. Taxes extra for the device and service plan. Online only.
Stop settling for weak sound. It's time to level up your game and bring the boom. Hit the town with the ultra-durable LG X Boom portable speaker and enjoy vibrant sound wherever you go. Elevate your listening experience to new heights because, let's be real, your music deserves it. The future of sound is now with LG X Boom. And for a limited time, save 25% at LG.com with code FALL25. Bring the boom. X Boom.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.